This is FiiO's M11 Pro. For $649 you get a high-end portable music player with THX technology. However, for $200 less you can get this. This is the regular M11. So why would you spend the extra $200 on the M11 Pro rather than the regular M11? What do you get? And how much better does it perform sonically? To start with, let's have a look at the size of the M11 Pro versus the original M11. Now, at first glance, I thought these were the same size, but apparently they're not. If you turn them on their side, you can see actually that the Pro is very slightly thicker. It's probably a little bit more obvious if I turn them edge on. It apparently has a bigger battery, and it has more power output through the THX amp, and it drains the battery faster apparently. So, I actually see on the back it says the THX amp is mentioned there. It's the AAA 78, and there are different types of AAA amp. If you go and look on my THX's website, they list them. But otherwise, the main change other than that and the fancy Pro label on the side is if you turn them on the other side, you'll see that you've lost a micro SD card slot, and I guess that has to do with the more complex electronics of the feed-forward circuit in the THX amp taking up more room. But if it's, for some people they've said it's a critical change and they want 2 micro SD card slots, you can get 512 gigabyte micro SD cards, but they're quite expensive. I'm not sure if they aren't more than twice as expensive as 2 times 256 cards. But I found some 200 gig cards which are pretty cheap. So if you want to avoid spending more money, maybe you do, but it's going to push the price over $1,000 if you start getting serious storage in there. But I'm kind of wonder why people insist on having such huge amounts of storage. But the most I've managed to offline from Tidal is 50 gigabytes, which is about 1,600 songs, and that's just CD quality. Now, somebody asked, actually, does it come with a screen protector? Actually, it does have a screen protector on here, which is so perfectly fitting that I didn't notice it when I first saw it as well. But if I turn it on its side, you can just see the very edge of the screen protector sitting there. But that was a good. It's a almost transparent screen protector in the sense of I didn't know it was actually attached. Now, in terms of functionality, otherwise, it's pretty much the same, as well as your power button on top. You have your playback, volume control, and forward and back controls. On the bottom, you have here's your normal headphone output, which is 3.5 millimeters, which also, depending on settings, can be a line out or a coax digital output via the adapter cable, which we saw in the box. USB-C. This is only USB 2. It's not any faster, but it does accept things like quick charge, and so should charge pretty fast. And you have your balanced outputs, 2.5 millimeter, which is the same as Astell&Kern introduced, and 4.4 millimeter, which Sony engineers introduced, and is probably the standard going forward, which I think people should use for various reasons that we'll get into maybe in another video. But is there any advantage you're using balanced over single-ended? Well, the circuit is designed to be balanced primarily, so you're going to have a benefit there versus the included single-ended output. Although I think the balanced outputs on portable players has come about as a result of hype and marketing. It's perfectly possible to design a single-ended output, which is very high quality and extremely low distortion. But people got hung up on the balance thing, and so now all DAPs have to have it if they're to be competitive. Now, that leads us to the actual user interface. And I've changed mine. The wallpaper is one of the ones that came with the DAP, but I've changed the apps around, so this is not the stock screen at all. The only thing that is stock is the FiiO player here. And I've installed Tidal, Cobars, Rune, and a few other things. Radio Paradise, which I installed via a third-party app market. Since there is no Google Play Store on this, it only uses Android 7. Radio Paradise is a really cool ad-free radio station, which I use for music discovery. Now it's in what is called Android mode, which means it's like regular Android, but you can set it up in something called pure music mode, which by tapping that, which will lock the player down into just using the FiiO player as the main interface. It will shut down all the other Android functions pretty much except the settings. So that is if you're just using stuff off the micro SD card, you don't care about other apps, you might just lock it in that mode for better, lower battery drain and maybe better sound quality. I'm not quite sure if it how much the Android background functions affect that. But most people, if you need to install other apps, they have an applications app, confusing as that sounds, which has most stuff, Amazon Music, Rune, Tidal, Cobars, SoundCloud, Deezer, Spotify, all of those, and they can install those directly. Or of course it has the alternative app markets, both foreign and Chinese, so that you can install other apps as necessary, as long as they don't require the Google Play Store. And they also have technical support. If you want to do a firmware update, you can just tap on that, and you can either update via microSD card by downloading it and putting on the microSD card, or hit check for updates. Now the default version is 1.0.0, which is, I think it's equivalent to 1.0.7 on the on this M11, because this hasn't changed for quite a while, and then this came out, and as far as I can see, it's functionally identical, apart from maybe some underlying stuff for a couple of extra features. So, that being said, a couple of things have changed, but not much. Let's just have a quick look through the settings. So, most of the stuff is fairly straightforward, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, all that kind of thing. The main thing that's probably useful is audio. And some of this stuff you can already select from up here, such as you can access the wireless and Bluetooth, and you can select. The first one which you can select up here is switching between these outputs being headphone output, line output, which will output maximum volume, but I think the line out circuit is slightly from the line out down here is slightly different from the circuit. It's not the regular amplification circuit. And the digital SPDIF output, if you want to output to something else, say I use it to output to a Hugo 2. Now the other thing we'll see, as some of the audio settings are in here, gain, high or low, which just changes kind of how fast the volume ramps up mainly. Doesn't really change anything else. And the filter settings, this is a thing to do with the, it's called low pass filter mode in the settings. This has to do with the AKM DAC chip that's in there. It has a number of built-in digital filters. Now, if you don't know about filters, it's going to be rather complex. The default is the short delay sharp roll-off filter, which is, I believe, from what I remember, is an apodizing filter. And I'll chuck something up on screen so you can actually see some of the details about those. The new version, the newer chips seem to have the one called an extra one which doesn't show on the diagram, called a low dispersion short delay filter. If you don't know about these things, I kind of wouldn't worry about it. If you're objectivist minded, you want the sharp roll-off filter, which is a standard accurate filter, which is what I use for most of my listening. The slower filters tend to have maybe a slight sense of a narrower sound stage, but are kind of maybe a little bit softer sounding. It's kind of one of those things where it depends on the music you listen to. You might try it with like a high quality acoustic music and see if you notice a difference. But I wouldn't stress over it too much. But it's an option there they have. The wireless playback quality you can select manually if you have Bluetooth headphones, whether you want, if you're using LDAC, I'd stick with normal mode. Quality priority mode or high quality modes seem to cut out often for me, whereas LDAC normal seem to work pretty well. But you can try it, see if you get any better results than I did. You probably won't be using SBC because that's the one that doesn't sound so good. But basically, in my experience, if you're using, say, noise cancelling headphones, aptX or better will be good. And usually, of course, you have your USB mode, which is also accessible by the pull down, whether you're using it to access the storage when you plug in USB, or you want to use it as a USB DAC, which is very handy. So you can actually plug it into a computer and use it as a DAC and headphone amp in that sense. Of course, if you have headphones which have an inline remote, you can activate that, such as a lot of stuff comes with an inline remote. A lot of portable headphones do, or IEMs as well. All to DSD is interesting. This changes all the music to DSD64, and it drains the battery much, much faster, and I don't think it provides any benefit. It's one of those things where some people, like a DSD, seems to have a little bit of a softer sound to it, but it was most noticeable with the old Sabre DACs, less so with the AKM DACs. I probably wouldn't bother with it. It didn't do anything for me when I tried it. Adjustable volume at line out. Now, if you use the line out mode, whether you want to be able to adjust the volume, which can be necessary for like with my car stereo, if I use the line out mode, sometimes it overloads the input of my car stereo, so it sounds a little bit harsh. So actually being able to lower the volume is a handy thing. AirPlay, if you want to use, be able to use Apple's AirPlay and out to Apple devices such as your Apple TV. So that's the kind of primary stuff that you might need to know inside the settings. Otherwise, most of the rest is kind of typical and straightforward Android 7. Now, into the player itself, this is where things get a little bit interesting. Now, one of the things that, since it just happened to be in here already, is a slight irritation I have with the M11 and M11 Pro is that sensitivity towards the edge of the screen is low. So I was searching for something and trying to type, say, the letter Q, and well, I typed then, but it doesn't always, like, I hit the edge of the screen and it doesn't always show up, which is a problem. You may have seen me swiping and then nothing happened. Well, it swiped then, but sometimes the sensitivity towards the edge of the screen doesn't always, see, there we go, it's not working. And that's been a little bit of a problem. It's a little bit of an irritation, which I hope they fix in future versions of their dApps. But other than that, the interface itself is, when you open it at the start, you get this screen, recently played at the bottom. And normal, a lot of players start with, albums, artist, genre, etc. This has all that under local music. And I guess it means so that you can jump into like optionally playlists or DLNA mode, which is a kind of server client system if you want to stream over a local network. But the local music mode has your usual songs, artist, album, and genre, and also ability to directly access stuff on the microSD or internal storage. One of the cool things I like about this, which they've added to this feature, or these features I should say, is now at the moment I'm playing a song called Pirates and Diamonds, and it's in this huge list of music. So if I just move this down here a little bit, you'll see a little target pops up, and if I hit the target, it jumps to the track that I'm playing back. And same with the artist, it jumps to the artist, or if you're in the albums, it jumps to the album. Really, really handy, and I wish I'd had that before, because then it helps me reset back to the point where I was maybe searching through something. So in that, then you have from these screens, you can have the sort options, which I'll just quickly show you. So you have, it changes very slightly, but then you have the playback screen, which is fairly typical of a playback screen. You have your usual options, whether you want playthrough, shuffle, or playback of one track, or play through the whole album again. You can favorite or not. You can add to a playlist. You can see the rest of the songs from the artist and jump to the track as a jump to the track thing again, which is handy. Or see the album. Actually, the album and the artist have the same listing on this particular album, because it's one artist and one album, and I don't have any other tracks from that particular artist. And then you have your little menu with the options, which you just saw before when I was showing you the search. So you can jump in there and do other stuff. Now, you'll see some of the things like equalizer and that. Let's just jump back to the beginning screen where you have the good old gear to access the settings. So we have your usual settings, a sleep timer, which includes stop after finishing the current song, very handy if you like using it to put yourself to sleep at night. Resume, whether it resumes in the middle of a track. Scan for music, you can of course scan all or scan a selected folder, which is handy if you're just added one album to a folder and you want to add that without having to wait ages for a complete scan. Various themes are available. I won't demonstrate those, including one with a sexy anime girl for those people who are into that kind of thing, which includes a few people I know. And EQ, you have a fairly basic EQ, which once turned on you can adjust stuff as you like. And it shows you the result at the top, as well as your kind of generic rock, dance, jazz, etc. options if you want to use those. FiiO Link is pretty, I haven't used it. I think it's like a DLNA type server, which you can have a server and client where one thing serves music and the other acts as a client. I've not tried it. Gapless playback, people will know about that. Play through folders if you want it, once it's finished one folder, to play through the next. Auto access to, I've never seen that. I have no idea what it does. Apologies. Lock screen album art, fairly self-explanatory. Replay gain, USB output, this is for people who use DSD and are playing back DSD files to a DAC which takes DSD. You'll need to know about these things. If you don't worry, it's just different output modes. Huawei's wireless thing, I guess that's for people in China who have headphones or the like which use that protocol. Auto search for lyrics, that's a new one I haven't seen before, which you can pull up the lyrics, that's very handy. Wi-Fi music transfer is pretty cool. It actually creates a server on here over your local network, so you can actually use a web browser to transfer music, which is handy if you don't want to stuff, you want to transfer like 1 or 2 tracks or an album and don't want to stuff around with micro SD cards continuously. And language, for people who want to see what languages are available, I'll just quickly scroll through those. Reset database, self-explanatory. Bluetooth device control, I haven't seen. I think that may be for if you have a FiiO Bluetooth thing and you want to change settings on that. And if you want to see what version I've got, that's there. And exit. So that's pretty much the user interface. And I may have missed 1 or 2 things. Possibly you can like jump into the playback screen or whatever, or what you're looking at. But other than that, it's Android 7 aside from the player itself, but you can try installing other players. The tricky thing about this is the USB output originally was not bit perfect, and I think in the latest version of the software it is bit perfect. So if you want bit perfect out of USB, you can now get it from the FiiO player, but other apps may not be bit perfect on output. They may have to use the Android output, which can be a problem, like Rune, for example, but the SPDIF output is always bit perfect in my experience. So that's something to be note about. So if you do want to use an alternate player, you might want to use, and you're going to use it to another device like a Hugo 2 or something like that as a transport. Although most people, if you're just going to buy one as a transport, you're probably just going to buy an M11. But in those times where you do, you might want to use the SPDIF output or ensure that whatever playback method you do can get bit perfect out of the USB output. With the sound quality, this is where things got quite interesting. Now, the question on everyone's lips is, how does the M11 Pro compare to the M11? Now, let's start with the M11 Pro just by itself. The sound quality with this is excellent. It's definitely getting right into the high end. You wanted to give an idea how much into the high end? Well, apart from just sounding very clean and clear, and if you've ever had any experience with the THX amps, it's a lot like those, of course, with a very good DAC attached as well. It got into the kind of sound quality that I believe I experienced with the AK380, which cost, a good, it's over $3,000, I think. And of course, that's even just without the extra amp module. But this AK380, even though secondhand is still quite expensive, it's slower, it's got less features. There has quite a few disadvantages compared to the M11 Pro, and I reckon the M11 Pro has matched it in sound quality for well under $1,000. But compared to the original M11, if you've already got an M11, I think quite a few people are interested. Is there a significant jump up? Should I change? Well, let's talk about that. Compared to the M11, well, I felt like with good quality music that, whether it's IEMs or headphones I was using for the most part, that, the M11 for me, it kind of had maybe a very slight, I don't know how to describe it, haze or lack of clarity in the music compared to, higher end stuff. Of course, I have high end gear. I've recorded Hugo 2 and a bunch of other gear, which has, has very good sound quality. So for me, it's more noticeable. If you're happy with an M11, be happy with the M11. I think it's very good for that. But for me, with all the high-end gear I had, the M11 was like, I don't really feel like listening with this. It was not something that I would pick up, grab, and listen to music with. However, the M11 Pro is something I definitely felt like picking up and listening to music with. I was testing it with some new IEMs in, which I'll talk about in a bit. But it was the amount of clarity and the lack of kind of any harshness or kind of, I suppose, people say digititis, like digital kind of sound from the M11 Pro, made it really excellent to listen with. So of course, in that, the kind of device that I usually go for in that would be Chord's Hugo 2 or even Chord's Mojo. So how does it compare to the Mojo? Well, I've got the Mojo in the car at the moment, so I don't have it here to put it on screen. But the Mojo for me, now this is one of the tricky ones. People have varying opinions of the Mojo depending on basically how it's hooked up. You hook it up to a bad, noisy USB transport or with a cheap, nasty optical cable, and you get lower sound quality because it's very transport sensitive. I don't want to go into detail why, but that's just something I've had a lot of experience with. However, if you do hook it up to a good transport, and a good transport is the M11 or M11 Pro, then it sounds very good. Ideally, I suppose the best transport will be a poly, but in that, it can sound very excellent, and now considering the change in exchange rate and the lower price of the Mojo is an excellent bargain. However, it's not a portable player. You need a phone or a player or something else to play music through it, or at least plug it into a computer. So it's kind of not really an apple-to-apple comparison. It's more apples to oranges. But in that, I think in terms of detail retrieval, the M11 Pro has matched the Mojo. And again, as I said, under the most ideal circumstances for the Mojo. And that to me was significant, and significant enough that I could pick this up and listen to music without having to hook up everything to say a Mojo or whatever. And, have an enjoyable listen and evaluate in-ear monitors and sometimes full-size headphones without feeling I was compromising my impressions through, lower sound quality. So that's really made the grade for me in terms of excellent sound quality. And again, well below $1,000. It's, to me, very, very significant improvement in sound quality. A very, very significant level of sound quality for the money. But the only thing that the M11 Pro can't do for me is that, to me, the Mojo and Chord Gear sounds just a little bit more natural, and it does have the more advanced tech in terms of reproducing natural sounds to how they originally were. But it was so close that I think, my experience is going to differ from other people, and a lot of people are going to feel that this is going to be, I'm sure people will come out and say, oh, this is way better than the Mojo. It doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, you can get a DAP with pretty much everything you need to have to power, even full-sized headphones to a very reasonable degree for well under $1,000. But anyhow, onto in-ear monitors. That was where some significant changes have come through and why the sound was kind of surprising. Now, these are the Campfire Audio Andromeda MW10s, and they celebrate the 10th anniversary of Campfire working with Mixwave in Japan. Hopefully they'll become a real model or version of the Andromeda for everyone to use, and very likely so given the number of people who are desperately trying to get hold of them from Japan. Now, the MW10s, like the Andromedas, are very sensitive, and the problem that the Andromedas have with the ordinary M11 is that they still pick up enough hiss, being that they're very sensitive, that it can be kind of unpleasant listening. You do get a degree of, even when listening with the music's playing, you can kind of hear the hiss in the background. And I can kind of tune it out, but for some people it's kind of too much. Now, there's something I wanted to talk about because of one of the changes in with the M11 Pro. That changes in the output impedance. Now, there's been a big obsession for the last decade, pretty much, with output impedance from portable devices, and that's the lower output impedance means better damping factor when used with headphones. And for example, I think Tile from Infidelity said that there should be a 1:8 ratio ideally. So 1 ohm output impedance will cover headphones which are 8 ohms and above. Although 8 ohm headphones would be that's kind of speaker impedance. Headphones generally start at 16 ohms for, say, the now Dan Clark Audio headphones and the Verum ones, and then most are kind of 32 ohms and above are normal. So the kind of silly thing it's become is that even there's one site that graphs all the devices that the owner has measured and rates them. This has a lower output impedance and this has higher. I mean, something like the difference between 0.1 ohms and 1 ohm output impedance is nothing. It makes no difference. And this jumping up to I think it's about 2.5 ohms makes no significant difference because, again, the worst case scenario, you're going to get headphones which are 16 ohms, or maybe IEMs which have a similar kind of out impedance. Now, with the Andromedas, however, the detriment to having really low output impedance is that you increase the chance of getting hiss and noise. The higher the output impedance, the lower the noise. Now, the problem with that, of course, you get a point where things become a problem with the things like the Andromedas, where they don't have an impedance that's flat. It varies depending on frequency. So when I plugged, say, the Andromedas into my old iPhone 6, which I think had a 10 ohm output impedance, then you'd have an issue of the bass would drop down compared to plugging them into a normal player. And that was very noticeable. But nothing like that happens with the M11 Pro. you get the same sound as you get with the M11, except you can hear the better quality from the M11 Pro. There's no change in frequency response. So someone out there is going to hoo and ha about there's having a higher output impedance. It makes no difference. It's unless you have some weird IEMs out there which I haven't heard of, and someone out there always ends up making some weird model which has an impedance of some of the drivers that dip down below, say, 8 ohms. That's going to make a difference, but otherwise 99.999% of people are going to be completely fine with this, and the lower amount of noise that comes out of this is going to benefit more people in the end. Now, if I can squeeze the drop HD6XX into screen, I tested with full-sized headphones, mainly these in the Verum ones to give an example of high output, high impedance headphones, and the Verum ones to give low impedance headphones. There are two aspects to this. Up to the maximum volume, it drove headphones very well, and the problem thing there was that I could get to maximum volume, and it still could, I could still probably listen louder. Now, I think what I got to maximum volume with was actually Whites Off the Earth Now by Cowboy Junkies. And that was probably a little bit louder than I generally listen, and the sound quality there was really good. The interesting thing was I have this in both DSD and a converted from DSD to PCM, and this is the converted version. Actually, the DSD didn't sound quite as good as the PCM version for some reason. So if anything, what was most noticeable about the M11 was that even CD quality material sounded really good. But back to the headphones before I jump into that, I could hit the maximum volume with that, and it's probably not the loudest album out there. I think maximum volume would be way too loud for me with the HD6XX and, say, a regular compressed pop album. But with classical, I could probably still hit that maximum, and maybe it'll be a little bit too quiet for me with some high-res albums which have very huge dynamic range and where there's very many quiet moments. Especially if maybe I was listening with full-sized headphones, well, maybe not the quietest environment, I don't know. But some people have complained about not having enough volume with the M11, and that may be an issue here. But if you are blasting your ears out, I advise you not to, because you destroy your hearing, you cannot recover it. So I tend to listen about 70 to 80 dB, so I'm kind of wearing the safe range there. Blasting your ears out is not going to make the music better. Actually, your ears shut down and actually make it harder to hear clearly. So listening quieter is actually better. But anyway, the M11 Pro drove the HD6XX and Verum 1s very nicely, as well as other headphones, very competently. Now, of course, I compared it, as someone requested, to one of the THX amps, the AAA 789 and the SMSL SP200. Both of those sounded very kind of similar in sound quality to the M11 Pro. It was really remarkable how you can get pretty much desktop quality out of this, even of course you have that limit in the volume. So the SMSL, I was only up to about 10 o'clock on the range to get the same level of volume as this at 120. So there was a lot more power in reserve in the THX-based desktop amps compared to this. And of course, this is a portable device. If it had real power output, you'd drain the battery in no time. You can see I've already drained a lot of the battery down to 20% doing all my listening tests. An interesting question I got, which was a very good one, I think, was at what point can you discern the difference between the M11 Pro and the M11 with the HD6XX? And it was a pretty close thing. I think with this music specifically, Whites Off the Earth Now, I could just distinguish kind of the finer instrument detail with the M11 Pro and the HD6XX. I've got a periapt cable on here, which is not the most resolving either. And don't throw me under the bus for talking about cables. That's another issue, but I could just discern a little bit of an improvement, and I think someone with, say, like this setup, the HD6XX, and with or without the periapt cable, I would say, it might be asked, is it worth jumping up, spending the extra money? Maybe, probably not. I would say not. But if you do have kind of really good IEMs, and again, these Andromedas are a really good example, then I think you're going to much more notice the difference between the M11 and the M11 Pro. It was more clear with these IEMs, and again, these are kind of $1,800 mark IEMs or thereabouts, depending on the exchange rate. So high-end IEMs, high-end headphones too, you're going to more notice the difference. Whereas if you've got something that's fairly kind of a bit lower end, I mean, these were based on a $400 headphone, then you might be just perfectly happy with what you have already if you, say, have an M11 or Q5S or other device like that. Also depends on the music too. I consider Cowboy Junkies to be a really high quality album and something where you'll notice the difference between devices, whereas a lot of modern music, which is compressed, it might not have enough detail to begin with. So that is something else to consider as well. So the M11 Pro, good and bad as usual. You have the benefit better sound quality overall, but at the penalty of needing a larger battery and still having lower battery life, and it's bulkier. I mean, you remember that plastic case, which I've got covered here with Velcro, which comes with the M11? Well, they tried to get those made for the M11 Pro, and the company, wasn't going to just make them for them. FiiO just wasn't big enough for them to care. So, but there are plenty of leather cases online for the M11 Pro, which you can buy left, right, and center. Probably go for one of those. But so as things go, on sound quality alone, what a nice improvement, and really into the high end, matching my AK380 in terms of sound quality. However, the only main disadvantages are no Google Play Store. Yes, it works with the usual kind of apps on here, and I've got a fair number on both of these running at the moment. But if it's something that depends on the Google Play Store, like I think One Player definitely depends on the Google Play Store if you want to actually buy the full version, then there's going to be a bit of an issue because you can't run Google Play Store on these. But for most streaming services, I mean, you can offline Tidal, you can offline Cobars, and you can offline others as well. So you can have music offline for use. And I've been using the M11, for example, in the car with Tidal offline with like about 1,600 songs actually loaded onto a micro SD card. And that being the other thing, of course, if you need two micro SD cards, you want to store a lot of music, well, the M11 is it. And you've only got one on the M11 Pro. But, with 512 even 1 terabyte cards available these days, although of course be cautious. If it costs $30, it's not a 1 terabyte card, it's a ripoff. If you don't mind spending half the price of the DAP on a micro SD card to store 1 terabyte of data, you can do it. But 512 cards are getting cheap these days. I think they're around down to below $80 now for cards from a reputable company like Samsung or SanDisk. So as I said, if you're thinking of upgrading, well, make sure if you have really good headphones or IMs, might be worth it. But otherwise, it's a significant improvement over the M11. And if you're going to be your first app, it could be easily endgame for you. And it's one that's hit the point where I happily listen with it, even if I know it's maybe still a tiny bit behind stuff like the Hugo 2 for me. It's still something I can take and listen to music with and really enjoy, despite the fact that I have high-end gear here. The issues, of course, as I said, are not the sound quality, but whether the features match up to what you want to do with the device. So I hope that review is useful, and if it is, give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Also, if you'd like to help me out, for a couple of bucks a month, you could support my videos and get to see my impressions in advance, ask me questions, get my buying advice, which will very likely save you way more than $2, and also join our little community of supporters online. If you would consider that, check out the links below. Also, if you're going to buy an M11 Pro, buy it through the Amazon link as well, and that will help me out too. As always, questions, comments, and of course constructive criticism, please post them below. If you did get an M11 Pro, do post your impressions below in the comments, and did what I say match up to your experience? Or did you have a different experience? Have you had issues with the software? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. And that will also help out other people who are looking to buy the M11 Pro, as people may have a different experience to what I did. So thanks once again for watching, and I'll see you online.